I am on the tail end of completing a folio of 22 images, which I am sending to Lasi, Romania, of all places. I have a couple of showings there soon. A friend I met named George has agreed to set up a couple of dates to show my photographs. He is a professor of photography in a university there, and I met him via the internet when he discovered my channel on YouTube 3 years ago. At the same time, I've been working on a series of black and white images from Robert Cameron's color transparency films. Bob was an avid aerial photographer who published the above series of books. There were coffee table books of photographs taken from the air. He flew above San Francisco, New York, Hawaii, Yosemite, Paris, London, etc. And I was Bob's main printer for the last 5 years of his life. We became good friends. Bob left me his films, and I had promised to keep his images alive and available through continued darkroom work. When I closed my Color Lab business, I decided to convert many of Bob's images into black and white photographs to show. And this is what I've been doing now for the last 6 years. So now, while completing the show I'm sending to Romania, I am also working to show some of Bob's photography in Half Moon Bay in California this July. As a matter of fact, both shows are scheduled for July, and that's just 4 months away. I spent the good part of a year figuring out how to make the best black and white negative from a color transparency in order to produce Bob's work in black and white. This was partly because I didn't want to build yet another color lab. In my life, I was involved in building 4 color labs, and I was too old and too tired to start yet another one. And since I've always loved the black and white photographs to begin with, I decided to go back to my roots, so to speak, since I first went into a black and white darkroom when I was only 8 years old. Another caveat was that I knew black and white photographs, when done correctly, would last over 1,000 years. No color process could compete with that kind of stability. Incidentally, the world is now adversely affected by a new coronavirus that is currently spreading on every continent with the exception of Antarctica. Over 6 months ago, I had a bout with the shingles, which is also a viral infection. Viral infections are very difficult to deal with, and in the case of shingles, if you have not had the vaccine, which I do not have, then it simply has to run its course. In my case, it's been over 6 months and I'm still recovering. So there were 2 to 3 months there where I simply could do nothing much. I sat on a couch nursing my very painful arm. Consequently, I was on the internet reading articles and researching photography subjects. I would look for things not discussed, so that I could contribute to the topic with techniques not currently taught. That's how I came up with my translation video, which is my latest one, taking exposure data from making a small, inexpensive print and coming up with the exposure data to print a final large print. I had to give up playing the guitar for months, but I was able to do some darkroom work after some of my pain in my arm subsided. And this was after just 3 months of sitting there. Now, I have often said that looking at photographs on a computer monitor, or even worse, on an iPhone, does not render the emotional impact that a fine print will when one sees it with his or her own eyes. Nevertheless, I'm showing some iconic images of some of the photographers of old that I came across while surfing the internet. One thing, of course, is that the internet allows immediate access to a huge host of data. And in the case of photographs, it's even better than the photo books I used to purchase when I was younger. Because let's face it, most are not able to travel to New York City at the drop of a hat in order to visit the Museum of Modern Art, in order to see firsthand an original Alfred Stieglitz's photograph. For this reason, I'm very grateful that my father exposed me to his heroes of photography back when I was just a teenager. I recall seeing some photos that really made an impact on me. Many of the photographs, if I recall correctly, were simply good, and some were even great photographs. But there were only a few that were really great prints. And I would look at these few prints from inches away and marvel at the detail and strong contrasts of black and white that they contained. Even then, I learned to appreciate a truly fine print. And they were actually pretty rare. My father's hero at printing, of course, was Ansel Adams. He had the most consistent quality when it came to his photographs. But even he had some photographs shown that did not measure up to his best work. I would say that 10% of the prints I saw were really outstanding, and the rest was simply good. It was the outstanding prints that made an impression on me. And even at that early age, I began to try to emulate the quality of those prints. They had very strong blacks as well as whites, but most importantly, they had extremely fine detail throughout their print. And in most cases, the local contrast of the image was superb, so that you could scan the print with your eyes, and no matter where you looked, the image always sang. But again, most displayed prints that I saw did not have this quality. There was only a few. Nowadays, someone like John Sexton accomplishes this again and again, but back then it was rare. In any case, these photographic shows that I went to impressed me enough that I never forgot the feeling I got when looking at such wonderful prints. I believe that those times generated a hunger that led me to search for ways to come up with the prints that I could do on my own that had this quality. This is why I'm so excited to finally show the photographs that I can make today. It took me years to get to this point where I am confident that the quality of the photographs that I make can produce the emotional impact that I have sought for over 50 years. This is, of course, my own opinion, as I usually will work on a print over a period of at least a couple of months, sometimes years. And then I display that print on a wall where I frequent daily. If I still like the print, and in this case I have to stress print as opposed to the photograph, because they are two separate things. If I still like the print after a year, then it becomes a keeper. If I don't like it after a couple of weeks or so, I will usually go back into the darkroom and work on it again. But that is only if it is a good photograph to begin with, and it is warranted. Anyway, during my internet searches, I kept coming across many familiar photographs that I had seen throughout the years. Most of them I remembered from photography books and magazines, but some I had experienced firsthand, like I said, because my father used to take me to see photography shows when I was young. He wanted me to experience seeing original photographs made by the masters of his time. These masters included Edward Weston, Imogen Cunningham, Ansel Adams, Minor White, Win Bullock, Brett Weston, and Henry Cartier-Bresson, who was my father's favorite photographer. Now, when I was sitting there on a couch, spending hours searching the internet for photography articles and images, it occurred to me that many of the photographs that I came across were ones that I had seen so many times before. Most were discovered via the purchasing of photographic books, of which I have collected many. But some I had seen firsthand, like I said. And then I realized that my own photographs had similar qualities that these iconic images had. That is, the feeling behind the famous photographs recalled in me my own photographs that I had made throughout the years. It wasn't as if I tried to copy these masters. It's just that the impetus to photograph a certain subject or scene struck me the same way it must have struck some of them. I distinctly remember now how I would come across something in front of me and thinking, I have to shoot that. And then I would get my camera ready, set the exposure, estimate the distance, and walk with my back to the subject. Then I would turn and click the shutter and walk away. I did this with my success photograph. The gentleman sleeping with his dog actually got up and talked with me afterwards. He told me that he didn't want that photograph to appear in the San Francisco Chronicle, which was one of the daily newspapers. I assured him that I was not a news photographer. This is back in the late 1960s, and back then, if you had a camera around your neck, many assumed that you were a professional, and I was not. I was only 17 years old at the time. I also did the same thing with my photograph of the Lady Art image. I walked up backwards and shot that photo and walked away quickly. The Chinatown smoker was different because I had a Rolleiflex at the time and I was looking down into the viewfinder. And people don't notice a camera around your neck as much when you're looking down. In that case, I had to work quickly as the subject was walking away and I had to shoot without moving the camera after I got into position. And so it was this experience of sitting on a couch and looking at old iconic images shot by these photographers when I came up with the idea of making a folio of 22 photographs honoring the photographers of old. I then went through my memory of the many photographs that I had made over the years to select as many as I could that would pay tribute to some of these past photographers. It seems to me that many of the pioneers of film photography are forgotten now. And in this day of digital photography, anyone can be a photographer as long as you have a cell phone. But back then, carrying an actual camera took much more effort. Learning how to correctly expose, to process your films prior to making an enlargement was an artisan's real task. In those days, carrying a light meter and working quickly to get an outstanding image took real interest and dedication. So I decided to make a folio of photographs in dedication to the photographers of old. This, in short, is a show I have planned for Romania. The box I made to ship these images in weighs 25 pounds, as I had to make it out of wood. The show I am planning for Half Moon Bay will indeed include at least a few of these images that I am including in the Romania show, but it will mostly highlight Robert Cameron's images. This is in keeping with my promise to Bob. And incidentally, there are 5 images out of the 22 from the Romania show that I did not shoot. 2 are from Bob, and 3 are from my father's films, which I inherited when he passed away in 2012. I remember going to art shows in the past when one could get a cassette tape along with a Walkman to listen to a guide's voice as you went from artwork to artwork. And I figured that today, with the advent of the internet and the fact that most have a smartphone of one kind or another, they can research the particular photographer mentioned in my show and look up that particular name to find out more about his or her images. Whether or not they see the connection between my photograph and the honored photographers is not the point. My interest lies in preserving the history of film photography and to help others learn to appreciate it. Since the show in Half Moon Bay will also be in black and white, I will be working from black and white negatives that I made from Bob's color transparencies. In my video lessons on YouTube, I have said a couple of times that making a good negative from a color transparency is one of the most difficult things to do in the darkroom. This is because you must understand how photographic paper responds to a negative. This is true whether you're making a color negative to print a color photograph or a black and white negative to print a black and white photograph. You want to design a negative to print onto that particular material, and you can't make a good photograph from a bad negative. It gets technical, and many darkroom technicians, and especially photographers, shy away from a too technical technique. Most just want to shoot. The one film that Bob shot in black and white, and where I didn't have to make a black and white negative, is the Louis Armstrong image. That was made on a stage where the great jazz trumpeter was performing. It was in 1941 in St. Louis, and Bob was invited to that performance by his friend Mr. Armstrong, and he was told to bring his camera. He told his orchestra that Bob was a personal friend and would be allowed to walk around on stage as he pleased to photograph. Bob was using a 4x5 press camera fitted with a slow-burning flash bulb. The flash would blindingly explode in order to freeze the moment. This was the way things were done in a dark space back then. Bob had to focus by distance, and based on the distance he would set his f-stop. And Bob shot 14 images that night, and then one of Louis Armstrong improvising on his trumpet is a treasure of a photograph. It captures for all time an artist of the highest caliber doing what he was born to do, creating an American art form that came out of the black experience in America, the slave experience. The challenge in this case was not making a black and white negative, as the original film was already in black and white. The challenge was getting the detail to come out of the handkerchief while keeping the detail in the dark shadows as well. For this I used something called film masking. In short, I make a supplementary film that adheres to the original in order to tame the contrast range of the negative to better fit the response of the photographic paper. In fact, I use this technique for all of the images that I will be showing, both in Romania as well as the show in Half Moon Bay. My YouTube channel was originally created to teach this technique, as most darkroom technicians are not aware of its use nor how to do it. An interesting thing about the Armstrong photograph. When the jazz great received an 8x10-inch photograph of this image, he said that it was the best photograph he had ever taken of him actually playing. All of the other photos taken of him was him placing the trumpet up to his lips and pretending to play. In this photograph, you can see the sweat on his forehead and the saliva dripping down his lip. The always handy handkerchief makes all the more sense. It is a remarkable photograph. I think it's worth to come to see my show in Lasi, Romania, or in Half Moon Bay just to experience this one photograph shot by Robert Cameron in 1941 of the jazz great. This is one photograph that I will definitely put on display in both shows.